Troy's an example of a guy after applying the system for 6 months that was finished in the top 10 in driving distance, top 20 in total driving. And last year, at the end of the FedEx Cup season, he was #1 on the tour in greens and regulation. Not 2, not 3, not 4, #1. And I think that speaks to your understanding of the geometry of the swing that allows you to be that reliable of a drawer of the ball.
Well, it's, you know, it's pretty simple, or at least I think it's a lot more simple now. You know, weight slightly forward, hand slightly forward, obviously is going to increase my path out and my propensity to hit a slight draw, whereas before I was making a lot of complicated movements to try to make the ball draw. So that's become more simple in my mind, and that's something I didn't have before I started working with you guys. You know, one factor there is that the first year I started working with you guys was the first year I went over 300 yards of my driver for an entire year.
How's your reliability of hitting a draw as you sit here today versus where it was pre-John Deere of last season?
Well, you know, if I was hitting draws, let's just say I was hitting draws at the time,
yeah.
You know, I really couldn't tell you how much they would curve or have a determining factor of figuring out, you know, I'm going to hit a 2-yard draw, I'm going to hit an 8-yard draw. Before, you know, I might hit one that barely draws, I might hit one that overdraws 25 yards.
Yeah.
So it became a lot harder to hit fairways. You know, now I should be able to adjust my draw to what I'm looking for on the course.
I'm curious, I've never asked you this question, what's your reliability of drawing?
It should be 100%.
Okay.
You know, before, that's the big thing, is the reliability of it was I really couldn't tell you if I was going to draw it or how much I was going to draw it. So if I caught a good week and I played well, you know, I might be getting it right on every time. You know,
yeah.
Now I can do it more times than not, week in, week out.
So you'd say when you get up in the morning, you feel like you're going to draw the ball?
If I don't, there's something wrong with me.
Okay. Troy, I just wanted to say before we're done that I appreciate the time that you spent practicing with us, the trust you put in us, and the demonstration that you just did. So,
well, I'm happy. I'm happy to do it. Thanks to you guys, or else I might not be here if it wasn't for you guys.
Thank you, Troy. Well, thanks, Troy. Thanks. Very nice. We've just watched a demonstration of the guys hitting their driver. And the first question that usually comes up in our lessons about the driver is it the same swing as the iron? And to answer that, we would first say that the same basic 10-word structural template applies. Next, the same cornerstones that define stack and tilt geometry apply as well. That is, the same stable inclination around the stable axis and swinging basically at the target. The results of this should demonstrate the same stack and tilt pattern of hitting down and hitting out with the face open to the target and closed to the club path at a relationship of about 50%. All of this demonstrated by the same three-dimensional description of the basic movements of the swing, of left tilting, extending, and turning, plus changing the knee flex and sliding the hips to raise the butt of the club through the ball. So many of the basics apply. However, there are marginally different priorities because of the decreasing loft and the need of hitting the driver with positive loft as opposed to the negative loft demonstrated with the iron. In other words, the golfer hits the 9-degree lofted driver with an 11-degree launch, or 2 degrees of positive loft. And conversely, the 30-degree 6-iron is hit by professionals with a 20-degree dynamic loft at impact or a 10 degrees of negative loft. So it's obvious that something is different. So at this point, we should begin to talk about the different priorities or points of emphasis with the driver past the similarities we just discussed. So first, simply, the golfer moves the ball forward closer to the center of the swing, and they stand a little bit further from the ball, shallowing the swing's angle. On the backswing, they have more side tilt, extension, and turn, which makes the swing longer. And on the downswing at impact, they also have more hip slide, extension, and turn. This serves to raise the butt of the club at a slightly higher rate, and the follow-through is slightly longer as well. Now we should take a look at each of these characteristics in a little more detail. First, moving the ball closer to the center reduces the descent, but it also reduces the outward direction of the swing. So in and of itself, that would make the shot straighter. Extending, tilting, and turning longer or more on the backswing propels the butt of the club or left arm further, making the swing longer. This allows for a greater segmentation in the release of the levers on the downstroke, or the power accumulators as the golfing machine would label them, allowing for more transfer of momentum or a greater whip cracking effect, if you will, as compared with a shorter swing, which would overlap those segments of the levers, creating less potential transfer and less of a whip cracking effect. At impact, by extending again, tilting, and turning, with a hip slide, the golfer can raise the handle of the club, shallowing the angle of descent, increase the dynamic loft, and access or use the ground for more potential power. This should not be confused with just opening the hips. Remember, the hips are extending, side bending, turning, and sliding. And finally, this finishes longer to accommodate for the speeding club head, first by rehinging the wrists, and next by flexing the arms. So what you see is the swing isn't different, it's just more of the same basic elements the average golfer doesn't do enough of for even the 6-iron. So often we begin our progression in teaching the driver with extending, tilting, and sliding to raise the handle or the butt of the club through the ball, as this is the biggest differentiator between the average golfer and the professional. This serves as a baseline to understand the differences between the driver and the iron, and lays out our basic straight shot with the smallest bias towards the draw. But you know from the pattern recognition section that golfers cannot swing the same way every time. They just demonstrate similar patterns. Plus, you know they need more of the basic movements of the swing to launch the ball properly with the less lofted club. So we started with our baseline of swinging at the target and go slightly to the right as the loft of the club decreases. And it is from that baseline that we could construct the boundary that makes up our model draw. A typical fairway is 30 yards wide, and half of that, or the center line, is 15 yards. 15 yards from the center at 300 yards is about 3 degrees. And we would want the ball to start just inside the edge of the fairway, say 10 yards to the right of the center, or 2 degrees. So the golfer would aim the club face 2 degrees to the right. To make the ball curve to the left, the three-dimensional path would have to be to the right of that. We would not want the ball to curve all the way back to the center line to allow for the roll of the ball. So the three-dimensional club path would be slightly less than the 50% relationship we previously discussed, or say 3 degrees to the right of the center line. It happens that 3 degrees is also the edge of the fairway or the boundary. So the golfer could aim the club face to the right center of the fairway, or 2 degrees to the right, and swing towards the edge of the fairway, or 3 degrees to the right of the center line, to produce our baseline draw with the driver. Here's Brad demonstrating our baseline diagram with a 3-degree club path to the right and a 2-degree open club face to the target, producing our baseline draw. The players we coach make the club path go to the right in different ways. They aim to the right, they swing to the right by extending more, and they hit down slightly more, or some combination of all of the above. But if you're specifically asking for a numerical preference, we would say to aim straight, to swing to the right 2 degrees, and to hit down 1 degree, which just happens to lead us to the longest shot hit by any of the players in our day of practice with the guys.
Now, Troy, you played, one of the first things we practiced with you was how your weight affected the curve, right? And when you played at the Fry's tournament in October of last season, what was your weight distribution on your feet in your mind with the driver at the setup?
In my mind, it was probably, I felt like, I'm going to say 65-35, but it probably wasn't that far forward.
Okay.
Because I had to make that adjustment.
Will you do an 80-20 for us?
Of course. I don't think it's going to cut.
At the end of Troy's driver hitting, I asked him to hit a driver with 80% of the weight on the left, and to keep it there, which he did in one try by putting his lower center more forward at the setup. A couple of things happened when he did this. First, he recorded the highest club head speed of the day, for himself or any of the other players. Second, he hit the ball farther of any of his balls or any of the other players, both in terms of carry and in terms of total yards. Third, he did so with a swing path that was at the target, not way to the right, and with a slightly descending blow that produced a spin rate that was less than the PGA Tour average. Fourth, he did it in one try, did not have to do it over and over again, and finally he hit a push draw that landed 3 yards from the center line. This is relevant because what Troy did, putting his weight forward and turning around that point, he created a simple model that allowed him to swing faster while still swinging at the target. A major problem with golfdom in hitting the driver is they do not swing the club fast enough, and under that pretense they are told to shift the weight back and forth. This has greatly complicated the equation for solid contact, plus it puts a restriction on how much the golfer can turn, placing a barrier on how fast they can swing the club. So again, here's a demonstration of a golfer achieving his highest club head speed by extending, tilting, and turning with the weight on the left, one who finished in the top 10 on the PGA Tour in driving distance for the first time in his career.
As you did your setup with your driver, it doesn't happen in all the players that they set up with more weight on the left, but to conform to the principle, what they do is they move their weight more forward, longer, faster on the downstroke to get out to that forward ball.
Correct. I mean, you got Troy Madison just trying to set up with all of his weight forward, demonstrate hitting a draw. The driver, it's got the most weight forward, the handle the most forward, so he won't cut one ball.
That's correct, and you guys will be able to see that because we have Troy's numbers included here for you. You'll see how as he got the longer clubs, the weight moved more forward, more on the left. Okay, should I move a few of these, Mike, and let you go through that? Okay.
Just some draws?
Yeah, we'll just start out drawing some, please. Anybody see that? Where'd that go? Nice shot.
Thank you.
Push draw without crossing, right? Push draw without crossing. Very nice, Mike.
Thank you.
Now, I want to make a point here, Mike, okay? Because you started to make it. This is an important point about the driver, and it goes to the expert player in learning how to swing in a circle as opposed to habitually swinging the club uncontrollably to the right.
Right. Right.
Okay?
I like your term. When people are trying to draw the ball, you want to hit out longer, not more.
Right. Meaning you want to keep hitting out long enough on the arc. You don't want to try to keep swinging out more degrees. When you start introducing more degrees to the right, your potential for left curving starts to increase. So it becomes hard to control the overdraw. What you need to be doing is to be able to continue moving the linear, continue doing the extension, and coordinating the amount of turn so that the axis is staying stable. Again, the porous player, when they come through, as they turn, they don't have enough linear. So the hip turn is actually moving backward. One more time, please, Mike. The hip turn is actually moving backward. The golfer is then inclined, makes it easier for them to hit the front of the circle, slicing the ball. That's most prevalent on the forward ball positions. Now, this is important because it's once the golfer establishes the axis that they're turning around is truly underneath their left shoulder right here, okay, then they can move the ball forward enough, in their stance to hit it right before the tangent and still draw the ball, okay? Most of the time what's happening is that the golfer doesn't have enough hip slide long enough, even in expert players, so that if they were truly, when they truly reach the left shoulder, the club is starting to come back to the left, slice. So the procedure that they adopt to keep from hitting across the ball with an inadequate hip slide, go ahead please, Mike. Come down please, to the top please, is they'll start backing their head up away from the target and away from the wall like that, which starts shifting the path out to the right more to help them counteract the amount that they're swinging across the ball because their weight isn't forward enough. Now you've got a really complicated equation of early extension like this to swing out and a tangent point that's moving back as you turn. It becomes very difficult to control the push slice, and the overdraw.
Right. I'd like to touch on one more thing while you've explained the curve, Andy, but also maybe a misconception or a feel somebody might have is that with their weight that far forward, how are they going to hit the ball high?
Well, please explain that.
Okay.
Mike.
Well, what allows them to hit the ball high is first their weight is forward, which actually helps shallow out the angle of approach into the ball because the spine starts tilting to the right.
The angle of descent.
Now, as the path goes out, you saw that all those shots I hit with draw spin, I could aim the club face to the right. Now you're actually adding loft to the club. So potentially you can hit the ball the highest because you're hitting it with more loft, hitting out at it.
You just said then that your weight was more forward and your hands were more ahead and you were hitting the ball higher or lower?
Higher.
Say that one more time, please.
I'm hitting the highest with my hips forward and my handle forward.
He just said that the more he put his weight forward and his hands ahead, that he's hitting the ball the highest, not the lowest.
And then there's a number of reasons. One, how shallow the club will come into the ball.
Number two, how open the club face can be and still draw the ball or not hit it to the right.
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
Now, you touched on another point there while you did that, Mike. Go ahead, please. You said that there was, with a driver, as you came down, there was more hip slide on a driver than a 6-iron.
Correct.
And what that was doing is that as there was more hip slide, that was giving Mike more side tilt to the right. In other words, with a driver, he has more degrees of tilt to the right, like this, than he does with a 6-iron because there's more hip slide with the driver. The effect of that is to help shallow that descent out without having to release his hands to shallow the hit on the ball, correct?
Right, and not to mention the catapult effect to hit the ball far.
Well, you want to elaborate on that?
Well, we explained earlier how that left tilt on the backswing turns into a right tilt when you hit the ball and to go to your finish. That change in this angle from a left tilt to the right tilt's a huge lever.
And huge potential power.
Correct.
For clarification, Mike, you were just explaining how there's more hip slide in a driver than there is with a 6-iron. And because there's more hip slide, that's creating more of a side tilt through the ball, which is serving to help keep the angle of approach going out longer, correct?
Correct.
And it helps to shallow the descent, the side tilt does. Now, if a golfer comes through the ball, and at some point on the downstroke, Mike, bring it on through, please. Their side tilt's increasing. Keep going. Side tilt's increasing, side tilt's increasing. One more time, please. Like that. If at some point during the downstroke, one more time, please, the hip slide stops, but the rotation continues, then the club will start to come across the ball at that point. At the moment the linear stopped, if the body continued to turn and stay in flexion, the club would have the effect of coming steeper and across the ball, which would result in what?
Pulls and slices.
Pulls and slices. So if you wanted to demonstrate a drill or a way of making sure that the ball drew or making sure that the path went out, what would you do?
I would just put all my weight forward. And I wouldn't even feel like I turned my hips on my downstroke. I just kept them forward. I wouldn't turn at all.
And how would you flex your arms coming
I'd keep my arms straight and handle forward.
Okay. Would you demonstrate that? Just punch one out there, please. All the weight on the front, handle in front, no shift, just staying on the front and extending. The left curve?
Yes.
That would be a drill that I would reinforce with someone who has problems with doing the linear long enough. Now, for clarification at this point, you should understand as the golfer, one more time, that Mike is moving his hips forward to create the side tilt to shallow the angle of descent and hitting out at the forward ball position. But he is not moving his head back to do that. That is a critical distinction.
Good player's problem.
Good player's
They
problem.
get the sensation of doing the hip slide and extension faster and faster because that allows them to hit the ball far and high. And that's really like they're familiar with it, so they just keep doing more of it.
Right. And unmitigated or uncontrolled, it can become a translation back away from the hole of the axis. One more time, please. It can become a translation back and, one more time, please, and an extension. Like that. That's the good player learning, maxing out those variables to hit the ball higher and farther.
And what the pattern is generally with that is the ball starts pushing more and overhooking.
Correct.
The push part, just so you can clarify that, the push part is the extension part, making the path go out to the right more. Any of the tilting or the translation back begins to make the club face close faster, so the face ends up being too close to the path. You get the big hook.
So one more time, just to get the differentiation there, you said that the out component was what? The extension.
The extension.
Okay.
So the path starts going out more and more degrees as you stand up.
Okay. And you said that the rate of closure issue was?
The tilting or translation back.
Movement back. That's how the club starts closing faster to the arc. The reason for that is that as Mike, when he swings down, if he does this improperly, when he translates back, his right shoulder doesn't keep moving in a circle. It moves downward faster than it moves forward. Okay? The downward movement of the shoulder, not moving in a circle anymore, moving more downward than forward, the stopping of the forward portion of the shoulder turn serves to act like a whip, or how is it Jasper says it?
I hit one of these.
Right, I hit one of these, he would say. That's the right shoulder stopping, the club
face
shaft
closing,
and the club face overtaking rate increasing. So if he does both of those, if he swings out more and increases the rate of closure of the club, he's got the potential to have a 0 face and a 6 out path, which would be the biggest pull hook. Now, I want to make clear that our golfers understand how then to use this knowledge to their advantage. So if you go ahead and swing back, we know that your intention is to move your hips forward. So the golfer is supposed to be doing the linear. We know that there's an intention of the golfer to turn, which most golfers, nearly all golfers, turn enough. Okay, that's why we haven't spoken as much about it to this point. Most of the golfers are turning enough, they don't have enough linear. So we've established the need for the linear, its identity, how to recognize whether you're doing it or not, in other words. Now we need to differentiate between the hips moving forward, okay, and the head moving back, because that feel is often confused. We've made you aware of that. Now I want you to tell me what you would do, Mike, if you were interested in swinging this club and not translating back.
Well, the first thing I would identify, first knowing that you're not supposed to, is going to help some degree.
Right.
We tell the players often to practice with some sticks near their right ear, not touching, but near it, so that they can feel if their head's going backwards or not.
Just to develop an awareness if they're doing it or not.
Then, after you have the awareness, I think some of the mechanics would be how you start your downswing, how fast your hip slide is compared to your releasing of the levers.
I want to elaborate on that. This is a very important piece for the expert player to learn to recognize. What Mike was saying there is that when he starts out, pick a number, but the butt of the club is, say, 22 inches from his shoulder. Throughout the course of his backstroke, start again, please. The butt of the club is going 23, ready? Go 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13. Now it's only 12 inches from his shoulder. In other words, because his right arm bent going back, and because his left arm crossed his chest, the butt of the club went 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12 to the right shoulder. In other words, your arms and shoulders are making a triangle, and when you swing back, the right side, the right arm, is the side that's shortening. Okay? Now, as you come down, if you went through the process of hip slide, turning, one more time please, Mike, to the top, you did the linear, okay, but you did not release the lever back, and you kept it 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, and the right arm, okay, go ahead please, Mike, to the top again, and the right arm thereby being, say it's 90 degrees at the top of your backswing, if it stays 90 degrees, or even some guys even increase it, okay, so you increase the right wrist bend, and you continue increasing the club shaft, wrist cock coming down, then the circumference or the distance of the arm to the shoulder is staying too close. Third side of the triangle is too jammed up. For Mike to hit the ground with this piece, he has to start lowering his shoulder down to reach the ground, or he has to come back into flexion too long, which would make him chunk the ball. One more time, please, just for clarity. 12 inches from at the top, right? So as he's doing the hip slide, the butt of the club is going to go, ready? 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. The butt of the club is continuing to pull away from the shoulder. Mike told you that the expert player often has groomed themselves to hip slide and extend. They have to coordinate how fast they're doing the hip slide, how fast they're extending, with how fast the butt of the club is pulling away from the right shoulder so as to keep their body in the same angle of inclination and to keep the axis of the turn stable without translating back.
In practical terms, you know, you hear often any bad shot, common response is, oh, I got quick. Well, in this instant right here, it's
too fast.
Yeah, or too fast. On the downswing, I would be telling the person to actually increase the speed that they're moving their hands and arms away from their body or their shoulder. They need to move their arms faster.
And what the effect that would have is that would bring the club straighter into the ball without changing the path of that the limbs make. In other words, the limbs can be making the same path, but Mike can change the angle of approach by how fast these levers move. Okay, that's the point here. So if Mike swings down, if he does one extreme, the most going back on the downstroke, this distance would stay 12, this right arm would stay flexed, and you would start to see the most translation back because this side of the triangle would be the shortest. Conversely, the high handicapper who keeps hitting across and slicing, they don't move the hips forward enough, long enough. They're always just pulling their arms away without the hip slide. They're going something like this. No hip slide, no extension. Okay, so that would look like something like that. in its most extreme form. What kind of a shot would that be?
Pulls and slices.
And what would the descent be?
The descent would be too steep.
And down and across, right? As a rule.
They're not going to hit the ball high.
No, they aren't, and they're not going to draw it. So, is there anything you'd like to add to? There's probably a few more things I think we'll need to revisit in just a second, but anything in particular about the driver that you'd like to add?
I think we should just hit one more, explaining the handle location and the height of the shot.
And guys, can we get a 4-iron for that? Will someone bring us Mike's 4-iron? This is an important demonstration because it's been presented, and a criticism actually of Mike and I is that you can't hit the ball high with your weight being too far forward. Correct, Mike?
Right, or the ball back.
Or the ball back, or
the
your
handle
hands
forward.
ahead, right. So Mike's got his 4-iron out here. Okay. Mike's going to do his 4-iron. This one any good? Yep. Okay. What are you going to do?
I'm going to hit a high draw with the weight forward, ball back, handle forward. I mean, I always ask people when I'm about to hit this shot, is it a high shot or a low shot? And you know, first reaction's, oh, it's low.
Because of the weight and the hands being in front, correct? Right. And the ball position, correct?
Correct.
Okay, just start out. What are you going to do? High draw?
High draw.
Good, got the draw.
A little late.
Yeah. One more time, please. But that ball's in the back of your stance. The face is, the handle is way in front of the ball, correct?
Correct.
Weight's on which foot?
Left foot.
Okay, one more time, please. Do it more. Another high drawing 4-iron. Now, what I hear whenever a golfer is, what I hear is that the weight being forward, the handle being forward, it makes you have too steep of a descent into the ball. That's what I hear. What I see in practice is a golfer hitting the ball with the weight forward, the handle forward, and I want you guys to decide what the descent and the, we got James here, he can tell us what the descent is. Right, James? I didn't even hear a divot on that one. No divot. Descent?
Yeah, it's actually
1 degree. 1 degree descent. Ball was on his back foot. One more time, please. Any of these balls cut yet, guys? Any chance of it cutting? Another high draw 4-iron. Descent, please, James.
1 second. It's 1 degree up.
1 degree up. Let's do that again. Ball's back.
I like that one.
Weight is on the front, right, Mike?
Right.
Handles forward, right?
Right.
Steep descent.
No, shallow.
Shallow. Touch more draw on that one.
Still didn't cross.
Not crossing the hole. Right to left curve. Descent, please, James.
Level.
Level. A little straighter, Mike.
Start it straighter?
Yeah. How's that? James asked him to start that one a little straighter, guys. Okay, to my mind, first of all, that was an expert demonstration of the factors that control the angle of approach, the club face, and the angle of descent. So, well done, Mike.
Thank you.
Now, Mike and I want to establish the baseline numbers to begin our discussion on how the driver works and the description for the template for the swing for the driver itself.
Where'd you like to start, Andy?
Well, first, Mike, I think before we start about the swing, I think we should talk about the numbers that we're trying to achieve, just so the the golfer knows how to make the tool work or what you're trying to do with it. So we can start with the horizontal plane, the face angle, and the club path, Mike. Tell us what you see there.
Okay, well, first the horizontal plane is, again, nearly 0. It's only 0.8 degrees out, so it's just about straight at the target. Club face is also open about a degree. The path is 1.3 out at the ball.
So Troy's hitting this ball with a very slightly descending blow, hitting it before the tangent, giving the path of the swing an outward force. The degree that the club path is swinging out is 1.3 degrees. The face at 0.9 degrees open is closed to that path, giving the ball the 0.4 degree draw. There's a couple of interesting things that I want to make a point about this driver first, and Troy in particular. One of them is the angle of attack, or the angle of descent, at 0.6 degrees. First of all, that is as I just mentioned, that's Troy hitting the ball right before the bottom of his swing. The tour average of golfers hitting their driver is about 1 degree downward. And Troy demonstrates that a player using this type of swing, a stack and tilt swing's angle of descent, is in line with the tour average.
Exactly, even though some people might watch Troy and see that he's setting up with more weight forward than a lot of the other players we teach.
So what you're saying there, Mike, is that having your lower body's weight to the left does not make the angle of descent too steep.
That's right, Andy.
Okay, as we work our way across the page, you'll notice the vertical swing plane number at 45 degrees, 45.4 degrees. That's a representation of the angle that the club is being swung on. And the angle that we would prescribe to as a baseline is a 45 degree angle to the ground.
With a driver.
Right, with the driver. And that gives a one-to-one relationship of the angle of descent to the club path. What I mean by that is that as the club goes down 1 degree, it also goes out 1 degree if you're swinging on a 45 degree angle. So what you've seen here is a group of numbers put together with a shot that Troy hits demonstrating the baseline draw that's representative of the swing that Mike and I prescribed.
Here are all the drivers Troy hit during the shoot. And again, if somebody wanted to take the time and look at the differences between the numbers for each shot, we just wanted to lay them out here for you.
Right, Mike. And the point here is to, again, demonstrate the pattern of swinging on a 45 degree angle, and while swinging on a 45 degree angle, having the face 1.0 degrees open to the target or pointed to the right, yet still closed to the path, 1.1 degrees, giving the ball the smallest amount of draw. And you'll notice that Troy swung out without shifting the swing's direction to the right. In other words, the direction of his swing was actually negative 0.8. It was straight or just the slightest bit across the ball. But the club path was actually to the right because of the angle of attack being downward. I'd also like to talk about the trajectory a little bit. And, you know, we have Garrett, and when it comes to the trajectory, Garrett hit the ball the lowest of the group, and Bill and JJ progressively would hit the ball the highest. And the first thing that I'd like to do is to discuss what's different about Garrett and Bill and JJ to start our discussion about the trajectory.
All right, well, there's a number of things for the trajectory. The first thing on the chart, you could see the comparison between JJ and Garrett. Garrett actually had his weight the most back when he hit the ball, and he's the lowest hitter on the group.
Right, so Mike just said that Garrett's weight is back the most, and he hits the ball the lowest.
Right.
And so he also has flexion coming through the ball. In other words, Garrett's weight is back the most and he's bent over the most.
Right. On the other end, though, you have JJ, for example, who had the most hip slide, most weight, or equally the most weight forward, and the most extension. He hit the ball the highest.
With the shallowest divot.
Right.
And Garrett is hitting with the steepest divot with the flexion.
Right.
Okay, and the path that is very straight or even across the ball.
Exactly.
Now, the next piece, we covered several pieces there that control the trajectory.
I'd like to touch on the face angle, too.
That's where I was
'cause
headed.
that's getting right down to the real basics. If you look at all the players' numbers and start to look at the trajectories, you can start to see the pattern where the player is hitting the ball the highest actually is hitting with the face the most open to the target. The players hitting it the lowest have the face aim more at the target or left of the target, so they're actually hitting it with less loft.
Right. So take in Garrett's case, I mean, Garrett's got this club with his driver like 2 degrees to the left, and JJ's got it like 3 or 4 degrees to the right.
Right.
That's a 6-degree difference in how much more
Loft,
open,
right.
that JJ's club is than Garrett's. So if you add together the fact that JJ extended, and in the act of extending, his handle was higher,
Right.
so he shallowed his divot and opened his face, it becomes pretty clear to see how much more easily he could hit the ball high.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting because JJ and Bill both had their weight the most forward of the group, and they hit the ball the highest of the group.
Right.
And Garrett had the weight the most back, and he hit the ball the lowest of the group. So we've assembled Brad and Charlie and Troy here to help the golfer see the difference between the side tilt, the extension, and how that affects the shoulder turn, and then how those things together affect how fast the golfer can swing the club. And you can see, if you look at Brad's picture on the left, you can see that his right leg straightens the least of the three, and you can see that his hips turn the shortest or the least. You can see that with the yellow arrow that the thorax extends the least, and as a result of that the left arm travels the shortest distance and the shoulders travel the shortest distance. And as you move across the page to the middle and you compare Brad to Charlie, you can see that Charlie's back leg straightened more. That allowed his hips to turn more degrees. As he did that, he side tilted and extended more, which allowed his left arm to travel a greater distance to propel the butt of the club farther, as it allowed the shoulders to turn more. As you move across the page, you're seeing a concept that we call spectruming, which is designed to help, is a way to compare pictures. It helps improve your perspective. And the third picture here to help you to improve your perspective shows Troy doing the most of those elements. And Troy here is straightening his leg the most, which is releasing his hip, allowing it to turn the farthest. He's also side bending and extending the most. The combination of those variables are allowing his shoulders to turn the farthest and his left arm to travel the greatest distance, which is propelling the butt of the club around the body the greatest distance. So Troy is generating the most vertical force as compared to, say, Brad. And beneath that, we included here the force plates, or the weight, because so often in golf it's been portrayed that to hit the ball far that you needed to have this big weight shift back and forth. And what's interesting here is that the player with the most weight on the left, in fact, this is a bit of an exaggeration in one of Troy's swings. We asked him to do the most. But to make the point that shifting the weight to the left allows the golfer to turn and extend more, which allows the golfer to swing faster. Now, there's a lot more in this diagram than just that, frankly. And The next piece that I would like to explain is that once one looks at Troy's model here and where his weight is, the next piece is that someone might say that having all your weight on the front would make the swing path go too far to the right. And that's not true, because you can see that the club path is measured here between the three golfers, and frankly Troy is swinging the straightest into the ball. His horizontal swing plane is 0 degrees. And Brad, so Troy has all the weight on the left, and he has a 0 swing plane, horizontal swing plane. Whereas Brad has his weight closer to centered, only slightly on the left, and he's swinging out the most, 5 degrees, or 6 degrees. And I find that very interesting because really the outward force here is the extension, or the bend extending on the downstroke. It's not necessarily where the weight is. And frankly, by Troy having his lower center so far forward, it allows him to be able to stay flexed through the ball, as opposed to Brad, who extends more on his downstroke. So there's a number of concepts that you can study and take out of this diagram. Again, its intent was first built to show you the elements of how to hit the ball far. So Mike, on the subject of swing path, side tilting, extending through the ball with the driver here, we've got JJ and Troy.
Yeah, they're a good comparison to make.
I think so too. We've compared them throughout the DVD. I'd like for us now to talk about the hip slide, the extending, and compare the two.
Right, well, what they're doing, first I'd like to say that they're both have their weight relatively in the same spot, the same degree forward when they're hitting the ball, but one is swinging out more than the other.
Right, and I find that particularly interesting because Troy sets up with all his weight or much more weight on the left, and JJ sets up with more of his weight on the right.
Right, and Troy's actually hitting straighter at the target than JJ. JJ's swinging further out to the right.
So again, JJ's setting up more on the right, and he's swinging out more. Troy's setting up more on the left, and he's swinging straighter. How could that be?
Well, it has to do with their extension through the ball, right? Troy doesn't extend nearly as much as JJ, which we already discussed how the extension done by itself actually shifts the plane out to the right.
Correct.
So JJ's doing extension more than doing his hip slide and his rotary, or his turn through the ball, which is shifting the plane to the right. Troy has a tendency, if anything, to do more flexion longer, which starts to make his path go straighter at the target, or even just a little bit to the left.
That's right, Mike. So what Mike just said there was the outward force was the extending. And what you see happening in someone like JJ is JJ moves his weight back, and then on the downstroke he moves his hips forward and extends his spine. And Troy keeps much more weight on the left at the setup and keeps it there much more constant throughout the time and space of his swing. So there's less shifting forward of the hips in Troy's swing and less extending in Troy's swing.
Right. I think it's also an excellent comparison for how far to hit the ball, because you've got Troy with a longer backswing, much longer, more hip turn, shoulder turn, hitting the ball a long ways. Then you've got JJ, who's doing a much shorter backswing, but still hitting it comparable distance to Troy. So how is JJ hitting the ball that far with the shorter swing? He's using that extension. He's doing it much faster to generate the power.
Correct.
Than Troy has to.
Correct. In other words, Troy's backswing is longer and his lower body's weight is more stable. JJ doesn't extend on the backswing, but he extends more on the follow-through to be able to propel the ball a distance far enough to play the course.
Right. We're talking about the pieces that affect the angle of descent on the ball. And I first would explain to someone where you put the ball in relationship to the left shoulder is the most basic thing. Everybody moves their ball forward with their driver to flatten out the descent on the ball. So knowing that the left shoulder is the center of the swing, I prescribe telling somebody who wants to hit a little draw to put the ball just inside of the left shoulder. That'll help control what the descent is on the ball. The second thing I would explain is by moving your hips forward, creating more right tilt when you hit a ball, especially a driver, more hip slide or more weight forward at address, having more right tilt, that also shallows out the descent on the ball. And then the third thing I would explain, well, the next thing I would explain is the extension. As a player goes through and he extends, he starts to flatten out the descent. If somebody swung down and went back into flexion like the wood chopper, the club head would crash into the ground. So you need extension also to shallow out the hit on the ball. And then the last one, equally important, would be the handle location. Putting the handle more forward shallows out the hit. Putting the handle back makes the club hit downward or more across the ball.
So the handle being back more at impact as caused by too much rolling on the club,
right,
and staying in flexion too much,
right,
would steepen the angle of descent.
Right.
And extending the most, okay, and raising the handle would make the shallowest.
Exactly. No divot.
No divot.
No descent.
And now, there's also a method of shallowing the angle of descent by bending the left wrist, which would actually make the circumference wider, but could also shallow the descent and make the golfer hit up at the ball. But that method of the low point being behind and shallowing the descent by cupping the wrist would be associated with right curving and slicing balls that you see so many high handicap golfers do, right?
Right.
In other words, their weight's too far back, and they're going to hit the ground behind the ball. So they pull their arms up and they cup their wrist, okay,
right,
to pull the club up to make the club not hit the ground behind the ball. And then all of a sudden they're hitting up at the ball.
Right.
Right. And hitting up is a leftward force, and cupping the wrist is opening the face.
Right.
So they have this leftward vector. They have this leftward path and a face that's opening, which is the description of the stereotypical slice.
Right. I would say that, however, you can see some very good players doing that. Some of the best players on the tour hit out excessively, and whether they were told to or not, use that cupping of the left wrist to straighten out their path into the ball.
Exactly. They use it as a means to reduce their overhooking
right,
for excessively outward paths.
Right. Most of the high handicappers don't have enough hip slide, don't have enough extension, don't have enough outward path to ever want to do that piece with a long shot.
Agreed.
This brings us to the conversation about spin and loft, and in particular the driver. This swing was designed to control these two variables, and most of the players who seek us out for help do so to drive the ball more consistently. And not coincidentally, they have enjoyed some of their best driving statistics. And for the average golfer, understanding the concept of spin loft will help the golfer learn a valuable lesson. You're watching Charlie and Troy hit their standard draw with the corresponding numbers, and you know that we have defined a pattern that these players are demonstrating. And next we will include a chart that shows the average of the PGA Tour to demonstrate first that the stack and tilt pattern is in line with the Tour average. In fact, it is nearly the Tour average. First, looking at the spin, you can see that Charlie's is actually less than the Tour average, and Troy's is right on it. Looking closer at the vertical launch, you can see that both are very close to the Tour average as well. The fact is, we spend a lot of time reducing spin and increasing loft in Tour players and the public alike. So after demonstrating these numbers to you, we should explain what causes the backspin. The first thing that causes backspin is the loft. as you see demonstrated in this chart that measures the spin rate of different clubs. That is, the 9-iron has more backspin than the 6-iron, and the 6-iron has more backspin than the driver. Speaking a little more specifically, it is the relationship of the loft to the angle of attack, or a term TrackMan has defined as spin loft, that is the major determinant of backspin. In our pattern, having the handle of the club raised through the ball regulates the angle of descent, keeping it from being too steep, and controlling one part of the spin loft equation. Next, the face is closed to the path via the setup with the iron, and to a slightly lesser degree with the driver, but closed nonetheless. Plus, the bias in our pattern of raising the handle and palmar flexing the left wrist would actually give the golfer the least spin, while swinging slightly to the right would be opening the club face. If a golfer wanted to have a driver hit with a lot of backspin, it would look like this, with the wrist cupping, adding dynamic loft. And if a golfer wanted to decrease the spin, they would raise the handle, reducing the angle of attack, and close the face to the path by palmar flexing the left wrist. This pattern would demonstrate the least spin loft. Having the least spin loft is not optimal for playing championship golf either, but the purpose here is to demonstrate the principle of spin loft and measure it for you, to show you what is causing the spin. So when we put the weight of the golfer with these pictures, you can see that the golfer with the most weight forward has the least spin, and the golfer with substantially more weight back has nearly double the backspin. So you can see clearly that the weight being forward does not make the ball have too much backspin. The next thing that influences spin that you should understand is where the ball is struck on the club face. Hitting the ball higher on the club face reduces spin, while hitting the ball lower on the club face increases the backspin. This pattern of reducing the descent and reducing the spin loft will help the golfer to reduce their spin while they add power to the stroke.
Andy and I are going to take some time now to go over some drills while still using all the equipment, because I think it's very important that everybody, when practicing, has an identity for each piece they're practicing and some sort of expectation of what the ball should or shouldn't do while they're practicing that piece.
Exactly, Mike. And what we're going to do to demonstrate that is Mike's going to start out doing a version of what we would call the flying wedge drill, which means that he's going to hit the balls and he's going to stop on all the balls where his right arm is parallel to the ground. The reason why we're doing that is that's going to help Mike isolate the elements at impact that he wants to work on, as opposed to having to do all the things correct to make a good shot. He's practicing isolating one piece at a time. You're going to do a demonstration here on drawing the ball.
Right.
Okay.
Now, what I should expect while I'm doing this is
for the ball to draw.
But it can also push more.
Yes.
Without any cut. That would be acceptable. And you could also see some balls overdraw.
But the ball should not cut.
Correct.
Correct?
Right.
Okay, so will you first just do a couple? Very good. And then we'll go over the details.
Somebody might ask, why is this ball drawing?
That would be a good question.
We've got some of the equipment here with the weight, explain that tangent.
Yes.
Also the handle, we touched on that earlier, that the handle, the more forward it is, the more the path will go out.
Correct. So if I could just take that a step further, Mike, when you're hitting this ball, you're putting your weight more on the front than on the back.
Correct.
Correct. You're putting the butt of the club ahead of the ball, correct?
Correct.
And as you're swinging back, you're doing short back swings, say to where the arm is parallel to the ground. The weight is staying on the front, correct?
Correct.
No, you're not translating any weight to the back, correct?
Correct.
And then when you come down, your intention is to hit the ball with your hands in front of the ball, correct?
Right. No release.
No release, correct.
We'll touch on that.
And whenever you're from the down the line view, it feels like that your hands are forward and upward more, correct?
Right.
And this left wrist feels like it's turning which way?
It's uncocking, or it's flat.
It's flatter
And
or even
uncocked.
turning downward,
Right.
right? So when Mike comes through, you do it to this camera, Mike, please. Okay. When Mike comes through, he's doing his linear, he's extending his spine, he's keeping his arms straight, and when he's doing that, the shaft is actually raising, and the left wrist is actually flexing towards the palm like this. What that's doing is that's making the face close to the path every time.
So to isolate this practice of holding my handle forward and up, I have my weight forward. That takes care of any other variable.
Yes.
And it also helps me hit out.
Correct. You see here how in the finish, when Mike's arm is parallel to the ground, you'll notice that the club is not recocked any. In other words, the club is not folded up any at all. He stopped it when the arm was parallel to the ground, but also at that point, the shaft was parallel to the ground. Correct?
Right.
One more
There's
time,
like
please.
3 things I'm thinking about practicing this, and I introduce each piece to the student while they're practicing to practice draws. Flying wedge by itself is keeping the handle forward, keeping the path moving out. Tell the person to put their weight forward so they also hit out at the ball, just standing on their front foot. And then the last piece, as they hit the ball, I'll tell them to keep their arms straight.
Right.
So the arms feel like steel rods. There's no flexion in them at all.
That's correct. And when you do that, you notice because there's no flexion at the end of the drill, the butt of the club here is, say, 8 to 10 inches away from Mike's torso. In other words, his arms aren't flexed so that the butt of the club is touching his torso. Now, the way that ball draws is because Mike's hitting the ball on the back side of the arc with the handle ahead, doing his extension as we've discussed, that's helping make sure that the shaft is always, if anything, raising. It's never lowering through the ball in this drill, which would be making the path go to the left. The function of the drill is to teach the golfer to keep the shaft higher, which gives you the push and the draw. Correct?
It comes down to your statement in the book. What are 2 things you could tell somebody to teach them to play golf? And put the weight forward, handle forward, hands in, just hitting this shot with the weight the most forward, the ball back the most.
That's right. We had the opportunity to write the book, and in writing a book, the first line of the book says that if all the golf lessons and all the golf videos and all the golf books for the last 100 years told every golfer every time to keep the weight on the front instead of the back, demonstration please, and to take the hands inward, okay, that we would have generations of golfers drawing the ball instead of slicing.
And I just want to hit one more so that you can see on the camera that there's no rolling of the wrists.
No releasing.
Right, no releasing. I'm going to do the Herald shot.
Okay.
Have the ball back the most, weight most forward, handle the most forward.
Now you see the biggest push draw. Well done.
Thank you.
Now, if you'll trade me places for a second, Mike, I'm going to demonstrate the opposite. The reason why I'm going to demonstrate that is to help you, the player, to understand when you're slicing the ball, what the offending part is. In Mike's drill, whenever he was hitting the balls, he was practicing his hip slide, his extension. What he was doing by doing that was making sure that the plane that the shaft traveled through on was always going constant, or if anything, up and out like this. So the path was always going to the right. That's how Mike's always drawing these balls. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to come down, and I'm not going to have any hip slide, and I'm going to let the club pass my hands the fastest. I'm going to recock the club the fastest, like this, and I'm going to cup my left wrist the most. Which way did that ball curve, Mike?
Curve to the right.
This is the purpose of this drill is for recognition. It's to help the golfer understand whenever they hit the balls, if they're not drawing, for some reason, the club is likely overtaking the left wrist too fast, therefore cupping it, and that has the effect of making the path go to the left of the club face. The path of the swing goes to the left of the club face. Behind it. Which way that curve? This procedure is very similar to a bunker shot technique, okay, in which the golfer's priority is to hit the ball the shortest, the highest, and have it stop the fastest, which not coincidentally is the opposite of the procedure that the golfer wants on the full shot, where he wants to hit the ball the hardest, the highest, and the farthest. So it makes sense that the technique would be the opposite. One more time.
I'd like to say something, Andy, about how we're classifying this as a drill, and people always want drills. I always make the comment to Andy is the drill is to do the form correctly, and then to do it correctly, somebody needs to learn how to isolate each one and practice it and know what to expect while they're isolating that piece.
Right, so what I'm doing is not necessarily what the golfer should do. I'm doing what the golfer shouldn't do, and I'm demonstrating by the curve of the ball to help you recognize when you have this particular problem. So when I hit these balls, I have no hip slide, I have no extension, therefore my club is uncocking the fastest, passing my hands the quickest. So the butt of the club is stopping, the overtaking rate of the club is the fastest in my drills. I'm hitting the ball all the time with the club face laying back, always open to the path. Therefore, you'll always see that my path goes to the left of my face. Can't draw it. That would be the poorest player hitting the ball. You think that may look peculiar to you. The poorest player doesn't look a whole lot different than that coming through the ball. They move the weight back. They don't come forward enough. They stay in flexion too long. They uncock their wrists too fast. Therefore, the club passes the leading edge, passes the butt of the club too early, making the path bend to the left too early and too fast. The result is a ball that curves to the right, which is the opposite of the drills that Mike demonstrated of pushing the handle forward and upward when he hit the ball, correct? Okay, anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, let's go through the
Okay.
follow through in that extension, unless you didn't have that on there.
Go ahead. Yep.
I just like to talk.
Yep, go ahead.
Next thing, I think really popular method for helping someone coordinate the follow through, because even students that we have understand what they're supposed to do, might not be able to achieve what they want because it happens so fast. So on the through swing, we described the difference between the expert and the high handicapper and their ability to extend and push their hips forward on their through swing.
Extension.
Right, that extension
Hip
allows
slide.
them to turn as they're hitting the ball. The hip slides acting on the spine so that it tilts to the right. The extension allows you to keep turning. And people, I don't think, realize how soon that starts happening, especially at the highest handicap level.
Correct, and that goes back to our Axeman analogy about how the golfers are not, it's not communicated enough in golf instruction how the legs straighten, the spine extends so that the hips can continue turning. Most golfers, the poorest ones, especially the slicers, are staying bent over far too long. They're not pushing off the ground enough, extending their spine fast enough. Those are the components that help the golfer hit the ball higher, farther, and to swing out longer.
So to isolate that motion, you'd see a lot of our students practice with, again, all of their weight forward. So that takes care of the linear component.
Yes.
Their stance a little bit wider, left knee flexed, And when they take the shortest back swings and extend on the follow through. So they just isolate that one piece of the extension here.
Yes. So what we tell the juniors when we're teaching them this concept is to put all the weight forward, put the hands ahead. And the two instructions is that by the time Mike finishes, his belt should be higher than it was at the setup. That's the legs straightening. Raise your belt, we'll say. And then, one more time, please, Mike. We also tell them to tuck the hips. So raise the belt and tuck the hips. So one more time on that. And you guys will see Mike, how his hips are pushing away from this club. One more time, please. Now, the poorest golfer, or the golfer who has trouble drawing the ball, what they do when they come through is they stay in flexion and they continue turning. And you see how the hips are not pushing away from my club. The hip slide stops. The golfer continues turning and staying bent over. Correct?
Correct.
Will you demonstrate again, the hips, the raise your belt, tuck your hips, extend with your arms straight.
Now, Andy, I'm going to demonstrate the hip slide and extension incorrectly.
So you did no hip slide, right?
Right. No hip slide, no extension.
What would you expect when you do a ball like that?
Well, it went much shorter for one. It went much lower.
Right.
And it pulled with maybe a little bit of cut spin on it.
Correct. Now, Mike, so we understand, just to clarify there, Mike did no hip slide. He merely turned, and he stayed in flexion as he came through. The result of that was the descent was steeper down and more across the ball. The opposite of that would be more hip slide, more extension with the handle forward and upward, which would start to produce left curving balls.
Correct.
Correct? Now this brings to light the second drill that I would have a golfer be aware of, and that is, you touched on it before, is to just start out hitting balls with all your weight on your left. Correct? No shifting back. If I were to take a beginning golfer and I could only tell them one thing, if you only let me say one thing to any golfer and only use just a couple of words, what would you say they would be?
Weight forward, hands in.
Weight forward would be the first two, right?
Right.
If you only keep the weight forward, at least you have a fighting chance. Okay, so Mike's going to start out hitting the ball with all the weight on the left. Okay?
Yep. Full shot.
Full shots, please. Which way did that curve?
It curved to the left. Ian.
We hit this one, Mike, and just put 100%, even put your foot like, just like that, right? All the weight on the left. No. Now, I was told that you have to get behind the ball.
They actually drew a little more.
To draw. True or false?
You were told that.
I was told that.
I was told that.
And would you say it's true or false?
That's false.
I agree. Okay. Now, Mike, one more time on that. Left foot, no shift. Now, that's the first lowest denominator. The lowest form of a golfer would be no translating, no moving back and forth. You said the second thing that you would do, right? That would be the hands in.
Right, move the hands in.
Okay. Now, this brings us to the point that I would also like for everyone to understand, to make sure that they're practicing properly, that the golfer, a lot of golfers have the connotation that they're supposed to roll their hands over like this to close the club face so that they can draw the ball. You should understand that this motion closes the club face to the target, but not to the path. That's a critical distinction. In other words, if Mike hits this ball and he rolls his hands over, the effect is the club path is going to go across. That's not going to make him draw it. In fact, it's going to make him pull it or be inclined to cut it. So, Mike, will you just demonstrate what it would be like for a golfer to stay in flexion and roll their hands over, what a shot would look like? Don't extend and roll your hands over. Okay? You'll see as we break that picture down, what you'll see is the club coming down, down, down. You'll see the roll being imparted on the shaft. the club coming across the ball, closing the face to the target like this. That's the low trajectory. When you're doing that, Mike, are your hands ahead the most or behind the most?
They're behind the most.
Hello? The hands are behind the most. The club is rolling over the fastest. Show me the picture of the club face. That's the least loft. One more time, please.
Shot.
Yes, flexion, full roll. Opposite, please. For clarity, most hip slide,
Extension, handle forward.
least roll. There's your height, okay? There's your shallower descent. There's your, it's done by the club face being more open. That's what's giving the potential for greater height. It gives the golfer more versatility in hitting the long clubs.
While we're doing that extension, Andy, can you point out why this isn't hurting my back?
I'd be happy to.
I'll hit this ball and hold the finish, okay? Full extension,
Of
full
the
hip
thoracic,
slide.
right?
Right.
So he's going to do full hip slide, full extension. So you look at Mike. Mike straightened his legs as he came through. In other words, he straightened his legs. His body went, as we said, from flexion to extension. In so doing, his hips tucked underneath his torso. But his head stayed still. That put the tilt in his spine, not in the lumbar, but from the thoracic, from this point back. That's where the tilt is. Okay, it is.
How's that different than a reverse C?
Well, a reverse C, the anatomy of that, Mike, start again, please, is that the golfer's head would move back on the backswing. Start again, please. The golfer's head would move behind the ball on the backswing. Start again, please. The golfer's head would move the furthest behind the ball. Then, as they came down, their hips would move forward the most, and they would keep their knee flex the longest without standing up. So they keep their knee flex, so they didn't stand up to raise their belt. The fact that they moved back the most on the backstroke, translating the axis to the right, combined with the most flexion in the knees coming down, gives the golfer the most tilt in the lower region of the back and the most opportunity for back problem.
I think that's another place we used Al Geiberter's picture on the follow through.
It is, that which was a model finish. I agree. Okay, so we've contrasted here how the hip slide, the position of the handle, the flying wedge keeps the club moving in a radial alignment around the body. And I was just discussing with everyone how if a golfer comes through and they start to impart any roll on the club, if they impart any roll on the club, that the radial alignment of the shaft is lost. It's coming across the ball, it's closing the face, and it's making the angle of descent steeper, okay? Conversely, if I come through and I push the handle forward and upward, I'm not touching the ground like this, correct?
Correct.
Okay, where does that put you?
Next,
Okay,
next drill?
The next drill or the next piece that I would like for everyone to be aware of is a drill that starts to give the golfer some orientation for the hands and arms, not only on the backstroke but the downstroke. It's common that golfers will swing back and they might do some sort of backstroke where they trace the arc like we mentioned, and perhaps they kept their weight forward. The problem is on their downstroke, as we said before, they don't do enough hip slide. Okay, so they don't do the slide and they start turning too fast. What that would do, one more time please, Mike, is when the arm is parallel to the ground, the arm would be out in line with the feet, or even sometimes in the worst cases, in the biggest slicers cases, the arm would be even further out from the feet. Okay, that would be a golfer who had the least hip slide and the fastest turning component. Mike, what kind of a shot would that give you?
That'd be giving me pulls and slices depending on the face angle. Path would start hitting more across the ball.
Correct. So your drill for that would be not only to practice with your weight forward, but would also be to practice with your torso, with your shoulders closed more.
Right.
So now Mike practices with his weight forward, and he's also got his shoulders closed. That's going to help his hands and arms to go in more. Go back to the top, please, Mike. But it's going to give him more room on the downstroke to keep his arm back in here on the circle. The result being is that Mike may even shift the path further out to the right, but he will not be swinging as apt to swing across the ball.
Right on these, you can even notice a difference on the follow through and the degrees that I'm turning.
Exactly, which would be another part of this drill. So if you went, Mike, if you went shoulders closed 20 degrees, weight forward, and then on the follow through, so he's going to turn the most on his backswing and the least on his follow through. Notice how his follow through, how his shoulders have turned only like 80 degrees, and how his hips have turned less than 90 as well. This
How
will
about the
be
right foot?
exactly, the right foot has stayed banked in the most, as opposed to gating up and over. That procedure of hitting the ball first with the weight forward, but second with the shoulders closed, is a drill that the golfer can use to learn to feel the backside of the circle as opposed to habitually coming over the top on the downswing. The last part of the drill that as Mike mentioned, was that the finish would have minimal turn. So you got maximum on the backswing, minimal on the follow through. I think it's important for the golfer to recognize that the more weight they put on the front, on the left, the more they close their shoulders, that enables them to go the most inward. Okay, and then if he keeps all the weight on the front and doesn't turn on the follow through, now he's setting up the whole machine to swing the farthest to the right. It's like the analogy of the bowler here, right?
Right, Earl Anthony.
It's like Earl Anthony. Again, notice here how Mike has only turned, what would you say, 60 degrees or
right,
so?
right.
Okay.
I'd like to take one more moment on the roll and how to practice preventing that roll from happening.
Okay.
I think we need to explain the elbows, how close together they should feel,
I agree.
and how that affects the wrist cock.
I agree. I'll let you start it.
Well, I'd say in general, high handicappers have their arms too far apart, so they don't hinge their wrists enough to begin with. And on the downstroke, the elbows come further apart, wrists uncock even more. That's going to produce the most roll that Andy and I were describing that you don't want. Some of the best players, even if their elbows aren't that close on the backswing, they have acquired a way or a feel that they actually bring their elbows closer together on the downstroke. That increases the wrist cock and helps prevent any roll coming into the ball.
So if you'll do your setup, please. I'm going to take this club to help you understand this, and I'm going to measure the distance of Mike's elbows at his setup. We'll have them at almost the width of one grip width here. And if Mike swings down and he stops when the shaft is parallel to the ground, and I measure that, that distance should still be the same. That distance of his elbows should still be the same. If he comes down and does it again, please, stops it when the shaft's parallel to the ground, and I take his arms and I split them apart like this, notice how the club shaft starts coming across the ball more. One more time, please. If Mike comes down, his elbows, for whatever reason, get further apart like that. That starts to make the club, you can see as he does it, one more time. You can see as I move Mike's elbows further apart, it starts to impart the roll on the shaft earlier and earlier, like that.
I think that might be the piece Hogan was trying to describe in that fundamentals book with the rope tied around.
Yeah,
right.
So the illusion there that you might use to draw on this, that's been a popular theory for a long time, is, like you said, the rope tied around Ben Hogan's arms. Right. And any turning and straightening, premature straightening of the right arm or premature rolling of the elbow joint like this the effect that will have on the shaft will be to make it come across the intended downstroke path or across the circle, which will give you a pattern of pulling, slicing, low pulls, and to get the ball to go up in the air, you would have to open the face, which would make the ball curve to the right.
Can I say that, tie that up?
Please.
On the downstroke, so the people that always see their picture, the wrist uncocking or the club casting, I would just tell them squeeze the elbows close together and don't even try to straighten the right arm at all for the feel. The right arm does have a function straightening on the downstroke, but if you're not drawing the ball and you are hitting behind the ball, releasing the club or those thin hits, you need to keep the wrist cock, that's elbows squeezed together, and keep the right elbow flexed longer.
Which would have the effect of keeping your head back.
Correct.
Correct? So the golfers' heads who are moving forward when they come through can practice their hip slide, they can practice their extension, but they should be aware that their elbows need to stay together, that they need to keep sliding their hips and extending.
I'd like to get that one on picture, just hitting this chip shot.
Okay.
Doing that.
Okay.
Hit right on top of the ball.
One more time, please. So can you show me incorrect downswing, please? Okay.
Now correct. Hit
Yep.
it. Easy.
Very good. Now, so the combination of doing the drill with the weight forward and closing the shoulders is the golfer's practice to exaggerate the linear because it's preset, and it's slowing down the rotary. Okay, so you got weight forward, all the weight on the front, you got the most turn on the backstroke, and you have the least turn on the follow-through. And the analogy there is, again, the bowler. When that bowler comes in to bowl that ball, when he comes in to bowl that ball, the foot's going which way, Mike?
Backwards.
It's going like that.
It's like David Graham or Greg Norman hitting these balls.
Exactly. Can you, we just also demonstrate that? Because that might be another drill that people might like to practice.
Back foot?
Yeah, he's got his weight forward, and he's going to pull his back foot back.
Certainly not spinning out of it.
I would say it's not.
One more.
Okay. Mike just demonstrated a number of drills to put maximum left curve on the ball to help you to recognize the number of pieces that are potentially involved. First, he put all of his weight on the front. Second, he closed his shoulders. Third, he took his hands inward more.
Put the handle more forward. Even
Sorry,
after
pardon me, Mike. Push the handle more forward. Fourth, he took the hands inward, and he did more turn on the backstroke to help him, to give him room to keep his arm more inside on the downstroke. And he did minimal turn on the follow-through, which means that his hips were only turned 45 degrees or so, and his shoulders were only turned 45 degrees or so. Those are all drills using the illusion of the bowler to help the golfer get the feeling of hitting the ball in the back of the circle with the handle in front so that they can impart right to left spin on the ball.
Now I'd like to just demonstrate one incorrectly, where I just spin around.
And do the opposite of all those pieces,
Right.
if you will.
My weight's back, handle's back. I'm not going to turn as much on my backswing or move my hands inward as far, and then in the through swing I'm going to turn much more, like spin around.
So weight back, handle back, minimal turn on the backswing, maximum turn on the follow-through, right? Look familiar? One more time on that. I'll narrate again the checkpoints. Weight back, handle back, minimal turning. You can even keep your right knee flexed because that would keep you from turning, okay? Hands straight back, no turn on the backstroke, maximum turn on the follow-through. The old windshield wiper coming across the ball. Okay, now, Mike, just so everyone gets the picture, let's do the opposite again. Now he's going to put the weight forward, the handle forward, the right leg is straight, the shoulders are closed, the hands go in the most, the follow-through turns the least, the spine extends up the most. There's your biggest push draw. Would you like to add to that?
I like that one.
Okay, well, how about okay.
Next,
Can we have Michael hit a couple of those
Yes.
ones that went
throw a
right
couple
to the-
balls, Andy.
Yep.
Andy, will you throw a couple?
Yep.
Okay.
Those shots.
I was more talking about the ones that looked more like the amateur shot.
Okay.
Got it.
Another one of those, please, Mike.
Another one of those for Steve. One more time and hang in there on the finish.
I'm trying.
Yeah. Weight back, handle back, right knee bent, no turn, lift. Maximum turn on the follow through.
Does it look different to the eye?
Fell off the map on the bad one, hasn't he? Yeah. Went forward on the other one. To the Gary players on the good one.
Remember the drill with the short backswing?
Yes.
That one without
Yes.
Andy in it?
Short backswing.
Extension thing, was it?
I'd like to say one more thing about this piece and add it in there. Okay.
Just so you know,
Yeah.
it started getting really dark when you know, the
Okay.
last drill you did right before this one.
Yeah.
If you wanted to redo it, it wouldn't be a bad idea.
Mike has demonstrated the drills for hitting the ball before the tangent on the back of the circle with the handle ahead and the face open, using his hip slide and extension to keep the shaft forward and upward to help impart a draw spin on the ball. I'm going to do the opposite with no hip slide, no extension, only using my arms. As I do that, the club will overtake my left arm the fastest, making my left wrist flex. This is a mechanism for opening the club face to the path. So the faster my hands stop, the club will start to transfer past the left arm, the left wrist will cup, and the face will lay back or open. Many golfers have this problem and do not recognize it or think that they're supposed to do it under the pretense that they're supposed to release the club. Mike just demonstrated for you how he's drawing all the balls without rolling the club or releasing the wrist bend, okay? I'm going to show you what it would look like if you release the wrist bend the fastest, how the balls would curve. No weight shift, no extension. Maximum flexion in the arms, maximum flexion in the wrist. All these balls are curving to the right. It's not necessarily a drill that a golfer needs to do, but it's just exposing the identity of the pieces so that when a golfer hits a poor shot and the ball starts deflecting off to the right, they have a place to start in their mind as to how to diagnose it.
Here are some videos and pictures to help you see some of the changes we made and what was being accomplished by the change in the picture. In this first picture, we have Brad Faxon. When Brad came to us asking for some help, his biggest concern was how high and far he could hit the ball. And our explanation was he needed to extend more longer and keep tilting to the left to keep his head from raising up. So in this picture, you can clearly see how much further the club went back, how much further the left arm traveled, And the reason it's traveling further on the right picture is his right leg extended more, his pelvis extended more, his thorax and neck extended more, which allowed him to turn. So I think that's a pretty good illustration of how much further the club can go back by extending longer. The second question Brad had was how could he make the ball draw every time? And we started to explain how he needed to move his hips further forward, keep his arms straighter, and get rid of the excessive bending in his wrists coming through the ball, or the excessive roll. So to tie these two pieces together, we first told him to just punch all these balls out, keeping his arms straight, his hips forward, no recocking or no wrist action through the ball. Another piece here is that when his hips were more forward, you can start to see how much more tilt there is in the upper body, which is starting to show the picture of extending through the ball, which is also allowing him to hit the ball higher and farther. So just to make the comparison here, you've got a picture on the left where the arms are bent and the wrists are rolling, and he has the most release, yet the ball is cutting, and his weight's back on the left. The picture on the right, he's got his hips further forward, his arms straighter, and there's no rolling of the club face or the wrists, and those balls are drawing. I think a lot of people would find that interesting. In this next video, we have Brad now, after a couple months of practicing the extension on the backswing, the extension on the through swing, keeping his hips forward, and practicing drawing the ball. What we have now is practice to reduce how far out he swings and to keep the club face from closing too much to make the ball curve less. So what Andy did here is he held the club up against Brad's visor at address, and we asked him to try and feel like his head stayed right up against that throughout the swing. Keeping his inclination helps the hands and the club keep traveling in an arc. The ball's just going to draw because of the ball position to the left shoulder, not because he's going to swing into out. So the head against the shaft here helps reduce the excessive outward hit. The second thing, as he's doing that, is he's feeling like his left wrist is cupping through the ball, which is actually keeping it very neutral or stable, because Brad will start to bow his left wrist excessively to keep the face more and more closed. Ball travels lower, and when he swings out, over curves too much. And then the third thing here is that Brad's arms aren't raising up above his shoulders as he finishes. Typically Brad will just when he stops extending and turning through the ball, his arms will start lifting up and they'll finish much higher than his shoulders, which also shifts the plane. So Brad's just reducing the amount outward he's swinging, keeping the face more open here to straighten out his curve and hit the ball higher. Again, here's Brad hitting some drivers, and there's a couple of things we could compare. First is the extension and the turning. The picture on the left, Brad's not extended and turned as much, and you notice how the club face is starting to roll over or close through the shot. In the picture on the right, Brad's extending and turning more, which is helping him keep the club face stable through the shot. Another note would be the right foot. On the picture on the left, Brad's weight isn't as far forward. You can see his weight's more on his toes there, and his foot is actually coming off the ground more on the left picture. On the right picture, Brad's hips are further forward, the right foot's banked in more, and this ball actually drew. Picture on the left, the ball didn't draw. So the main theme here is how the body keeps extending and turning to keep the club face stable while your weight is forward to ensure that you don't hit across the ball. Now we have another video of Brad, and now he's progressed even more to the point where he can actually practice 2 or 3 things at one time and try and coordinate them. Here we have Brad at the top of the swing, and you can see how he's practiced his extension, so his shoulders turned more, his axis was stable, club went further back. What he's practicing on his downswing now is to release those levers, the left arm to the shoulder and the right arm, straightening enough to keep his head from going backwards. This does two things. There's a certain amount of power gained by releasing those accumulators or those levers in order, and another, it actually straightens out his path into the ball, another piece to keep him swinging in a circle rather than excessively out. And the third thing this does is his head doesn't go backwards. Brad has a tendency to have his head tilt backwards because his arms don't pull away from his shoulder fast enough. And then on the follow through, you could see he was able to hit this ball where he kept his arms straighter than definitely than the first picture, maybe not as straight as his best ones, but he was able to keep his arms straight and extend more through the ball. So again, here's a nice video to show you the practice of pulling the levers down so that the head doesn't move back or the shoulder turn stays stable to keep your path straighter into the ball. Now we're going to go and look at some of the pictures of my practice and videos of my practice and show you what I'm working on. Just like anybody else, there's always things to keep working on and to make our swings work more efficiently. I would say that because I'm familiar enough now with the ball flight and the variations of controlling how the ball is going to fly, that I can at least play or make a swing that's functional when I go out to play and not have to have all these pictures perfect. But I always try and work on perfecting the geometry to help it work even better. So in this first picture, you can see me practicing the flying wedge. On the picture on the left, I'm hitting up with a face that's actually open to the path. I'm having a hard time drawing the ball. On the picture on the right, I've got my handle more forward. The face is actually more open to the target, but it is close to the path. These balls were drawing. So a couple of notes. You can also see how my head was raising up more on the left picture. That's introducing some more push to my cut. The picture on the right, my head's not raising up as much, so my path's not going as far out, so I'm hitting tighter draws with my handle more forward. After watching my wrists uncock too soon and seeing how my left wrist cupped at the impact from the previous picture, now here's my practice to start improving that. My tendency, which is on the left picture, is I turn and extend too fast on my downswing, and I uncock my wrist too soon, elbows coming further apart. So what I do in my practice is, the picture on the right, I keep my shoulders closed, increasing my wrist cock and squeezing my elbows closer together. And you can clearly see how much more wrist cock I have on the picture on the right, and how my shoulder stayed more closed, which helps my left arm stay in on my downswing. So I try to take this to the extreme every time I practice, because I know if I leave it alone, it's a tendency I have. So I practice squeezing the elbows close together, keeping my shoulders closed, and increasing my wrist cock on the start of my downswing. And you also notice my head isn't as high on the picture on the right. I try to do that with my feeling of the head staying against the wall, or the head not coming out of its inclination. Now we're a little bit further down during the downswing, and you can really see the difference again in what my elbows and wrists are doing, and my shoulders. I'll start with the elbow positions. You can see how the tendency for me on the left is for my right arm to be higher and further away from my body. That's contributing to my wrist being uncocked early. The picture on the right, you can see how much closer my elbows are together and how much lower my right arm is, which you also see how much more wrist cock I have at this point. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but I'm hitting all these balls trying to get this to the farthest end of the spectrum on the right. So again, the next piece you can see is my shoulders. My shoulders are already square on the picture on the left. They're much more closed on the right. That's helping my right elbow not run into my body and not start to let the elbows push apart. So again, I'm trying to keep the elbows close, which is keeping the wrist cocked, the shoulders more closed, keeping the left arm in and not letting my right arm bump into my body. Now as we move even further along in the swing, you can make a number of comparisons here. My picture on the left looks like most of the amateurs that we watch. Their hips don't push far enough forward, their left wrist cups, their arms even bend more. As you see, my right arm straightens too fast coming into the ball. The wrists are uncocking sooner. The picture on the right, I'm practicing still keeping my elbows close together, which keeps my wrist cocked. My right elbow is bent longer coming into the ball, and then my arm stays straighter and my left wrist has no cupping motion through the ball. Also, my hips are further forward and I'm extending more, so even though my handle's further forward, which is a downward component, I'm barely hitting that mat. I'm just hitting the ball really cleanly off the mat. I know a lot of amateurs complain because they have to hit off of mats. Usually it's because they've got are missing the extension and missing the components or how the wrist should move through the shot. So again, a number of things happen because of this. One, I can hit the ground further forward, picture on the right. I can hit outward at the ball more. I can hit this ball farther because I'm hitting it with the correct amount of loft, and I'm extending more, which is increasing my ball speed. So again, I'm trying to practice this to the extreme. I'd also like to make a note of how the shoulders are turning on this downstroke coming into the ball. Picture on the right, my shoulders are staying much more square, they're not turning as fast, which is also keeping my left arm in closer, which we'll look at next. Now here's a still showing the same comparison basically after I've hit the ball. And one of the main reasons why I do this picture on the right and practice it, you can see the hips forward, the arms straight, and my left wrist is flatter rather than cupped, is to take spin off the ball, which helps me hit the ball farther. You can see on the left how the left wrist is cupped more, the hips are back, and I'm not extended. I put too much spin on the ball in these shots, and that affects how far I can hit the ball as well as what type of curve I'm going to have. So I would associate the picture on the left with cutting the ball with high spin, and the picture on the right drawing the ball with low spin. So I thought I'd put this swing in just to illustrate one of my shots, basic motion shots, that I'd at least give a passing grade to. Not perfect, but represents most of what I want to do here. And as you can see, starting with the backswing, there's no shift of the weight. My left shoulder's going downward, I'm extending, so my backswing's long enough. On my downswing, my hips start moving forward. I've got more wrist cock than my worst ones, not as good as my best. And then on the through swing, my hips are forward and I'm extended, staying in my inclination. So I would give this at least a passing grade. You can still see some flaws in it, but it can work. I'd like to make a couple of notes on this picture at the top. One is that on the left picture, you can see how cupped the left wrist is and how open the club face is, and also how the turning of the left wrist and cupping of the left wrist has made the club laid off here at the top. I think a lot of amateurs think they're supposed to open the club or roll their wrists on the backswing, and all this really does is set them up to hit more across the ball on their downswing. You can see on this picture on the right how I've made the change. I've kept my left wrist flat, or I haven't turned my wrists at all. Shaft's more on plane, the club face is more square. This is setting me up to start my downswing, maintain this arc or maintain this outward hit at the ball rather than rolling or hitting across the ball. Now as we watch this video here of these three swings, you start to see first the result of cupping my left wrist and rolling my wrists on the backswing. That picture on the left, you can see the downstroke, the shaft comes down higher, I hit more across the ball. On the two pictures further to the right here, you can see how with my left wrist flatter and my wrist less rolled, the shaft came down more from the inside and my face was more square and I hit outward at the ball more. You can also see what I'm doing in the practice while Steve's holding that shaft in the middle picture. You already know my shoulders open up too fast. That usually brings my left arm out too far. So I'm practicing keeping my shoulders more closed, pulling my levers down more vertically than outward. My elbows are more close together so that my wrist cock is more. Now what's also interesting as I'm practicing this, keeping my left arm in, my shoulders closed longer, the path of the swings on the pictures on the right are not going out excessively. That's because at the same time I'm doing my downstroke, I'm also keeping my head against the wall or maintaining my inclination as I turn and extend, so the club actually comes out lower to my shoulder than the picture on the left. So I can hit these really straight shots or tiny draws, keeping my shoulders closed, left arm in, wrist cock longer, as long as I maintain my inclination and turn and extend on my through swing. Just added this picture, some practice the day before a tournament, and how I try to get the practice down to some of the simplest things to help me hit the ball the straightest the next day in the tournament. And I thought my swing looked pretty good here. All I did was put a head cover under my right arm and practice my extension through the ball to help my ball fly straight. So the club would move and the hands would move in an arc by keeping my pressure points in my right arm to my body as I turned and extend through the ball. You'll notice on these shots there's a little bit of cupping in the left wrist, and at this time I wasn't concerned about that because my tendency was just to overdraw slightly. So I'm taking some of the closed club face and some of the outward path out by letting my wrist cup just slightly through the ball. My main concern was just to keep my weight forward and extend, keeping my arms on my body rather than swinging up and out. Here's Charlie Weed practicing punching some drivers and practicing his draw with his driver. First thing was his tendency on his backswing was to cup his left wrist and roll his left wrist. That was opening the club face and laying the club off at the top, and also on the downswing that was helping him hit more across the ball. So his swing felt like it was about a half a backswing there, even though it's really a full backswing, just to help stabilize the rolling and the stop the cupping of the left wrist. On the through swing, he's doing a couple of things here. He's sliding his hips forward, reducing how far his hips can turn and his shoulders can turn to help him hit out at the ball more. And he's keeping his arms straight and trying to maintain his wedge so that all the balls draw. Keeping the handle up and forward with the left wrist flatters, making the face close to its relationship to the path so all the balls will curve to the left. Oftentimes Charlie will lose the feeling of the draw, and he'll go back to this sort of practice with all of his clubs where he slides his hips forward, reduces the hip and shoulder turn, and raises and flattens his left wrist. This all will ensure that he hits out at the ball with a closed club face so all the balls curve left. Here's a picture of Bill Lundy practicing, and we made a comparison here. We've often spent time with Bill propping his right hip up or trying to get his right hip higher on his backswing so that his torso or shoulder turn was more stable and more centered. What this does on the downswing is it helps him hit the ball more in line with the target versus out at the ball. You can see the comparison of the shoulder turn on the downswing here. On the left picture, Bill's shoulders are much more closed, which was really a result of how his backswing tilt was. And the picture on the right, you can see how much more square they are and how much more in line the shaft is getting. That's also the improvement of the tilt on the backswing and downswing. Here's a comparison of Tom Shear and what Andy and I would see as a problem for more of the good players, and that is they're extending without turning. So in the picture on the left, you can see how far Tom's hands and arms are from his body coming through the ball, and you can see how little his shoulders have turned and hips have turned. So he's only extending, which is actually shifting the plane to the right excessively. The picture on the right, you can see how his shoulders are turned more, his hands and club have traveled more on an arc than just straight out to the right. So he's extending, turning, and his hands and arms are following that turn of the body. So he's actually straightening out his path. They're swinging more at the target here. Now as we move further along, you can see a big change here in Tom's turning. He's extending in both pictures. However, on the left, he is missing the turning element, where you can see how the club shaft is coming out higher, and also the club face is turning over more. Picture on the right, he's extending and turning. His hands and club are following the turn of his body, and you can see how the shaft comes out below the shoulder and the club face is staying square to the arc. So the turning and extending helps keep that club face more stable and keeps the path more in line with the target.
So to hit it a little bit higher, Mike?
Yep.
I mean, Andy, do I need to move my more extension or more hips forward through impact?
Yeah, just now hold it right there and extend longer. Keep cranking it, keep cranking it, keep cranking it. That would hit it even higher than what you were doing before. Okay, do it one more time, please. And do standard, what you think standard is.
Okay.
Okay, so your arm is right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, left tilt and extend even farther. Left tilt and extend even farther. Like that. That would give you more potential power and more potential transfer.
Okay.
Okay? Nice job.
That was higher.
Yeah. All right, Garrett, the highest draw, take this, we're going to take this one up another grade, okay?
Okay.
On purpose.
Okay.
You'll do the most extension, let your left arm go the farthest back, okay?
Okay.
The longest extension, the longest shoulder turn, left arm orbits the farthest. Now do it again and take it up another grade.
That's good.
Yeah. More longer.
Okay.
I like it.
It curved a lot less that time, and it was
Yeah.
higher.
Now, do you have another gear there? Let's try it, see if you got one more gear. And what I mean by that is more left tilt, more extension, left arm even further on your
Okay.
backswing. Speed went up 4, Garrett.
My club head speed did?
Yeah.
Wow.
Crank it longer, longer left tilt, longer extension, longer left arm. Higher.
Well done.
Much higher.
Now, Garrett, that's beneficial for shots over a tree or just knowing that,
Right.
over an overhanging branch or situation like that. You've got to learn to integrate that. If you want to use that as your basic,
Yeah.
you've got to be at least as good as your normal procedure you've adopted.
Right.
Okay, at that swing as you were at the other one.
Okay.
But the result will be a few more mile per hour and a higher potential trajectory. Okay. Want to get some drivers now?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm going to hit one more
Okay.
like this.
Okay. Nice. Nice job.
That one flew the furthest.
Very nice.